Oh, hello. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome you all here at the Sanctuary of Chalmers United Church. We also welcome those who are listening in to this gathering on the live stream.
Thank you.
We're all pleased to see you as we all take part in these very important steps in our journey. This past year and more has been very difficult for all of us in a number of ways. I hope that you'll find today helpful in lighting our path forward for yourself and for Chalmers. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over some of the basics for our gathering today. We've tried to make sure that this gathering will be as safe as possible for all of us, COVID times. So please continue all the mic's not. That's one of the rules I'm about to mention. Masks. Oh, that does sound better. Okay, there. So we're continuing to follow all the protocols that we've set up for worship, which is the social distancing, the wearing masks at all times, except when you're talking at a microphone, which will include Q&A. Everybody should have been registered at the door for the contact tracing. Now we're live streaming this and we're recording it, and Brigida is up in the booth there. And we thank her for spending time to keep us all technically connected today. And the headphones that you use for worship should also work for today because we're using the same sound system. You'll notice there's lots of mics up here. We're doing that to keep everybody separate. And there's also this additional mic at the lectern right here. During the Q&A portions, we're going to ask you to come forward and speak at the lectern. Please don't touch the mic or the lectern so that each person, it's handless. If you have problems approaching the lectern, hold up your hand, and this handheld, Ivan will bring it around for you. And be patient as we do with all these mics and technical difficulties. We hope we don't have any. All right, agenda. So while you're looking at that, I want to make an important note here before we start off with a prayer. Is this Thursday, September 30th, is the very first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So I would like all of you to take some time in the next few days, research some of the concerns and suggestions for the Indigenous people of Canada. And at this time, I think it's appropriate that we should all acknowledge, since time immemorial, Indigenous people have occupied and cared for this land. In acknowledging the land, the traditional home of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, we seek to rebuild right relations with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, to learn from them, to live on this land with respect and gratitude for its bounty. I'd like to make a prayer. Good and gracious God, what a wonderful opportunity lies before us this afternoon. As we come together in community, may we be sensitive to our own needs and to those of others. May we engage this time with a spirit of humility and genuine curiosity. May we have the courage to open our hearts and minds for each other. And may your spirit call forth our best, allowing us to dream dreams, see visions of a renewed and renewing Chalmers. God be with us today. Amen. All right, so as you can see from the agenda, there's a lot to get through. We hope that it'll take us about an hour and a half. I'd like to welcome our special guests coming today. We have our administrator, David King, and our partners in this journey from FaithCare, Bruce Shank and Bill Bickle. And the rest of our reference team is up at the front. There will be two sections where you can ask your questions, a Q&A section. The first one will be after David's talk, and the second one will be at the end after the FaithCare and reference team items. And when those come up, for people who are listening in, we'll put up a couple of phone numbers and an email that you could actually participate from home if you want to. Otherwise, people will come up to the mic. So, without any further ado, David.
Thanks, Nick, and good afternoon. When I arrived earlier today, I came in your sanctuary and had an awareness that set me back a wee bit. It's been 32 years and 5 months since I've been in this sanctuary. And it's been 32 years, 4 months since I've been ordained. And in those intervening years, I have had the good fortune of joining many communities of faith and folks who are doing their level best to follow the way of Jesus. In that intervening time, I've served 8 congregations as their pastoral minister, and subsequent to that, I served for 5 years on the General Council office staff, where I was the national policy advisor to ministry and personnel matters. I was the policy analyst in that work. And then subsequent to that, I spent 2 years as deployed conference staff in now the former Bay of Quinte Conference. I was the conference minister for personnel administration. And so my work in that area was to resource congregations and presbyteries when they encountered challenges in their relationships with their ministry personnel. Along the way, and further to all of that, I managed to amass a bit of training and such that I have been recognized now as a conflict management coach. I am a certified grief recovery specialist, and likewise am a teacher and administrator of the True Colors personality type indicator assessment tool. I tell you all of this and a bit more so that you'll understand how I come to be with you. So in addition to what I've talked about there, also a 2-time commissioner to the General Council, the first being in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, Labrador, and the second being in Oshawa. Around the presbytery, which we no longer have, but around that time, I was chair of pastoral relations, and I've been secretary of Hills and Shores Presbytery and was likewise chair-elect of that body. Also was on the team that responded to the first request that we change our governance model at the presbytery level, and so was part of a team that did that and brought in the, had been Coburg Presbytery, then became Hills and Shores Presbytery, and it was just about that time that the idea for Narrowgate came into mind. For those of you with some biblical knowledge, you'll no doubt be twigged to that word in so much as the encouragement that Jesus offers is to enter through the narrow gate as opposed to the wider one. And so with that understanding that a narrow gate in biblical times was intended to be a passive device that would cause folk to stop and think about what they were doing. It was designed in such a way that you made a direct entrance when you were attempting to get into a gated community or a community that had a wall built around it. You had to stop, you had to reposition yourself slightly to the left. You made one step over there, you turned again, and were able to walk through on your journey. It was at that time that the presbyteries were changing, and subsequent to that, when the United Church of Canada nationally had a change in its governance structure and conferences were removed, that I first really sensed that the church was coming to a time when we were experiencing diminishment in area of ministry personnel. We simply don't have the number of ministers we once did. We were experiencing some increased demands on reserve funding, and that meant that we couldn't continue to operate as we had with a large support staff at the region. And as you'll know right now, we have one personnel minister in this region and one administrator. So that being the case, I was in conversation with a couple of congregations that needed some help. But there was a bit of a dilemma, and the dilemma was that in our polity of the church, I couldn't work for 2 congregations at the same time. I was in a called relationship or an appointed relationship with one congregation, and so I could not avail myself or make myself available to other congregations until the time when the church said, we now have to look at new ways. And so Narrowgate is an outcrop, if you will, of that opportunity, such that while I have a pastoral relationship with a congregation, I'm also available to offer support and counsel to those congregations that may need it. And so that is how Narrowgate came into existence. And more particularly for our application here, I was asked by the region, the Eastern Central Ontario Regional Council, if I would come into this piece of work and to become the administrator here at Chalmers. And that was the result of a determination by the region that Chalmers was in an unsatisfactory state. And so that unsatisfactory state, coupled with a request from your governing body at the time, so the CCE, right. I'm sorry, I've got another congregation on my mind. All these acronyms. Anyways, and so I came in to do that piece of work because the church large was not able to find folk who would do it for you. We could not find, the church large could not find a minister who would tend to pastoral care, and nor could we find either a clergy person or a lay person who would work for you as the administrator. And so I was asked if I would take that piece of work on because of my standing as an intentional interim minister. And so all the sorts of things that I've been about up to this point in time have made me ready to do that. And so I was pleased to step in, having, prior to this engagement, having worked with the CCE as the pastoral charge supervisor. When you don't have a minister, you need someone from the larger church to offer counsel and guidance, and I was doing that with them until we came to the time when the CCE chose to recuse itself from leadership, and now I'm here for that, to help see that it happens. And you'll note the words that I've been using here. I'm not here to do your work. I'm here to ensure that you are equipped with the resources to do the work that is yours to do. And so for the next little while, and you'll hear the subsequent phase, if you will, of what's going to be happening, I will be offering support to the existing bodies that have functioned within Chalmers. And my want is to see those continue to be as they were designed to be. So if there's a piece of ministry that you're about, I want to encourage and make it possible to the extent that it is to continue to have those in place. My role is dual in that I'm also a commission. And a commission in the United Church of Canada is a recognized body with authority to exercise the functions ascribed to it by a superior body. So in this particular instance, the region has come along, made its determination, put an administrator in place, and assigned that function as a commission, so that what is determined by the commission is, in point of fact, what will be. The findings of a commission and the directions of a commission are not open to debate, and it is as though the region themselves have opined about this, and the outcome is as it's presented. That's an area I never want to go into. I never want to be in a position where I have to adjudicate something. I would rather us have conversation and come to an outcome that's satisfactory. One of the reasons that I agreed to take on this piece of work was because I was delightfully involved with the reference team. The reference team is a collective of people that represent this congregation and who are working alongside and following with and learning about restorative conversations. And that's what Bill and Bruce will be speaking about later in our time together. So that's simply to say I'm me. I am a minister. I am not your minister. And that's an important distinction to be made because I am on a limited term engagement here. And so I could not possibly administer the church and be minister to a church as I am. I am the intentional interim lead minister at Bridge Street Church in Belleville. Have been there for 3 years and have just accepted a 2-year extension to that appointment because we still have work to do, thanks in large part to COVID. My appointment here at Chalmers is 1 year in length, with an option that it might be extended depending on how far we get in the process of getting you folk back to a place where you will be able and equipped to continue to exercise ministry for the constituency that is yours. So I am glad to be joining you on the journey. It is and will be a journey, but certainly it is my intention to make it a shared journey, such that there will be abundant opportunity for you to add your voice and wisdom to the direction that this place may well go into the future. So I'm aware that part of this time that I share with you is also for answering questions. And I feel like I've talked for, jeepers, almost 15 minutes. Questions?
I wonder, David, if you could just clarify for us the timelines. My understanding is that you have to make a report to the region next June or whatever, and there'll be an interim report. But I think people would like to know the time frame of what you're trying to accomplish and what the reporting lines will be. This was the first time I'd heard that there could be an extension. My understanding was that by next June, you were going to recommend whether we were a viable congregation or not. I think it needs to be clarified, please.
Sure. Happy to do so, Al. Thank you for the question. As Al has suggested, the region has requested that I apprise them of the work that we've been about since my appointment up to and including June of 2022. As with all things related to pastoral relations, there are target deadlines and then there are drop-dead deadlines. The target deadline is a report to the region for June. But if I have reason to believe that we are in a bit of a momentum and still trying to find solid ground and shared space on moving forward, I can certainly go to the region and to say, listen, this is where I would have you be, this is what still needs to be done, what do you want to do? And it really is their call at that point in time. But June is when I would like to be in a position to offer that assessment. And so we will have opportunity, as I suggested, between now and then, to meet as a congregation and as groups within the congregation and to start looking at those really fundamental issues. How do you exist as a community of faith? Why do you exist as a community of faith? What do you want to do as a community of faith? And those are the sorts of things you'll be asked about and given opportunity to have conversation about. I think that's probably as good I can do, Al.
Thank you, David. In order to prove that we're a viable congregation, the work of the church still has to go on while we do the mediation, find out who we are, etc. Some of us have been asked to form, say, a worship committee to carry on the work. I was one of those. So I asked a series of questions about finances, this, that, the other thing, who's going to make these decisions. And there's nobody at the moment who's in a position to say, yes, on behalf of the congregation, please go ahead and do this or take that initiative or whatever. And you just explained to us that you're here to support us, but not assist us or tell us what to do or how to do it. And that's fair. So are we as a congregation allowed to create an interim leadership system that I could ask, hey, is it okay to hire a minister from Southern Ontario that has a great message for a congregation that, like ours, that's going through what we're going through, but it's going to take money to bring them down or her down, and it's going to maybe accommodate them for a weekend. How do we work that out?
Talk to me.
Okay, thank
Bottom
you.
line is no decisions can be made by this congregation that affects its assets until such time as I sign off on it.
So you're the
I
point
am
man.
it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Bill's been listening to the ball game.
Bill Agnetos, but yes, the reason I do have my phone in hand is just in case anybody emails in a question. I'm not being rude here. So Bill Agnetoff, shortly before you began, David, your role as administrator, there was a motion, which I think was included in the minutes of the CCE, that there be an additional person appointed as a trustee, and that person was named. And then there was a question raised as to the proper procedure for appointing trustees, and I read the United Church document on that, and it said that there must be a meeting called, and it's my understanding now that you are the one, if there were to be a congregational meeting, who would call that meeting, and that 2 weeks' notice need to be given, and so on. It seems to me that if there is to be an appointment of another trustee, then we should have that meeting. And is that something that you've considered doing? I, as an adherent of this congregation, would like to see that matter dealt with as soon as we're able. Could you respond to how you feel that should be handled then, please?
I don't share your immediate sense of urgency around the appointment, to be perfectly honest. I can hear the concern to have a slate. I would like to spend some time getting to know the existing trustees, to understand what they understand their responsibilities to be, and then to see exactly what need there is and what resource there is. I was surprised to see that reference in the minutes, that was going to happen, because the term of that body was coming to an end. So as it stands now, I have not given that a great deal of thought. I certainly will, and can absolutely see that happen in due course, Bill. Absolutely.
Good. Thank you for your clarification.
Sure.
Hi, Grace McBride. Following up on what Bill... If I were taller, I could. Following up on what Bill just mentioned, I, for one, would find it very helpful if the whole process, entity, regulations, polity around trustees and who the current trustees are was shared with the congregation. To me, it would be a very informative teaching opportunity to learn more about the working of the United Church, and if we're going to be viable, what's our identity within that denomination. So maybe a little United Church 101. Personally, I would find it quite helpful. Thank you.
I'm happy to see that done, Grace. It's one of the curious things that the United Church applies its regulations differently depending on the context of the congregation, its size and so forth. And what has passed for practice may in fact be quite different than polity or praxis. So happy to have that sort of investigation and to share the findings, and I'll commit to doing that for sure. Well,
Hi, this is a question emailed from Michael Cook to David. can you give us a very preliminary picture of what you see? What is our state of health? What do we need to be doing in the coming months? Now, that's not a small question. Sorry for the editorial comment, but I'm sure we all look forward to your preliminary answer to that question. Okay, I'll just repeat it then. This is again from Michael Cook. My phone keeps locking. Can you give us a very preliminary picture of what you see? What is our state of health? What do we need to be doing in the coming months? And Michael was also asking approximately how many people are here. I counted about just over 40, and I think as for those online, YouTube will tell the number of people that are online. So, thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for the question. I would, and I am reluctant to pass any assessment. This is the first time I've actually seen you face to face. And we've not had conversation. We've not been through a process where we can be about collective understanding and so forth. So what I would say is, based on what I have seen from my involvement in the reference team, is that there is a tremendous amount of hopefulness amidst the reference team and amongst the reference team as to the possibility that exists within this congregation. And we are operating from the perspective of bringing tools to a situation, opportunities to a situation that will allow you to be more fully aware of what's going on and where your voice fits into the leadership of this body. And when I use the word leadership, I'm not necessarily talking about appointed or elected people. I'm talking about anybody who makes a contribution to the life and health of Chalmers. That is what leaders do. They give of themselves to that common goodness, that common goal. So I would request, Michael, that I get a couple of more months anyways to be able to do that. But from the folks I've worked with, I have every expectation that you folks will step into and up to the task of being the church. And I do that as a reflection of my fundamental hope that we weather this time, not just as a congregation, but as a denomination, and that we come out of it in a position of strength, because we will have gone through the hard work of figuring out who we are, what we're about, and where we plan to go.
Hello? I think that's a good segue into the next section of our conversation. I'm Bill Bickle, and I'm here from FaithCare. Many of you have seen me online in sessions, listening circles, and other kinds of circles. I come from Port Hope. I started at Queen's 45 years ago this fall, and in the Commerce program, and I did not attend this church. In fact, Bruce was asking me on the way in, what church did I attend when I was in Kingston, and I didn't. I came to this sort of work later. I became a banker for 25 years and moved around a lot, and moved back to Port Hope where I grew up. I did grow up in a United Church. I'm an Anglican now. My wife and I live in Port Hope, and we're very active in a church there, and we're also active in our Port Hope House Tour, which is going to go live next Saturday, so I'm pretty excited about that. That's enough about me. I do a lot of work in congregational health with churches in all denominations, and about half of my consulting practice is in FaithCare, working with churches like you in restorative practice. So we're throwing around a lot of words today. All the United Church theory and methodology and polity and so on is complex, and to you, restorative practice may sound confusing and like new language. And it is a new way of being together. And why I say this was a good segue to Michael's question, in some respects, what should we be about in the next few months? We should be having conversations together and restoring relationships. That's what we've been starting in this process with the reference team, is learning how to have good conversation, have fair process. And so some of the things that we're going to show you over the next 10 minutes or so are those principles that are useful and helpful. And as David said, one of the reasons he wanted to do this work was because he's been involved in the restorative practice work that we've been doing as a reference team, but as a congregation. Some of you have been participating in that. It's a way of being, it's a way of being together, it's a way of moving forward together, dealing with our stuff. And so that's what we've been about, that's what we need, we need to be about for the next few months, is having those kinds of conversations. Who are we? How are we together? How do we work together, etc.? And how do we do that well? So a few things about restorative practice. Restorative practice is, oops, wrong glasses for that. And unfortunately, I can't see either of my, the screen or this, so I'm going to have to turn, I'm sorry. It is about restoring healthy relationships. Relationships break. That's just been happening since the dawn of time. And so God came as his son to restore relationships, and we're in the restoration business. We have been given the ministry of reconciliation. That's just a fact. And we need to be about restoring relationships with one another. It's about reducing and preventing harm. So again, when tensions get tight and we are arguing, people can harm one another, and we need to be able to deal with that, heal it, forgive it, etc. It's not paving over it, it's dealing with it, and that's one of the things we're learning how to do when we are dealing with restorative practices. It's also about not only repairing harm, but building the capacity for good and healthy relationships, so that when conflict happens, and it inevitably does, we're equipped to deal with it well. Think of an argument going on in a marriage. If the marriage starts to, if the arguments aren't being dealt with and sorted, the marriage will start to decline, and eventually it may end. If that relationship can be dealt with properly at the beginning, there's a better chance that it won't fall apart. And so it's the same thing in community. If we can learn and develop the capacity for having those kinds of conversations, we can not only restore relationships, but we can make sure they don't break and fall apart. The fourth circle there is about discussing the needs of the community, and that's sort of where we jumped off from Michael's question and what David's saying. This ability to have conversation together sounds, and I know when we first got here, some people said, well, are we just going to sit around and talk? And haven't we done all this before? We hope that we're doing it in a way that grows our capacity for relationship building and relationship restoration, and helps you figure out, what do you want to do? How do you want to go forward together? What should stay together? What should change or be dropped? And then finally, it's about giving everybody a voice. And so we'll go to the next slide. Oh.
So I'm Bruce Shank, and I've also been part of FaithCare for many years. I'm a Lutheran pastor, and I spent about 20 years working as the chaplain at Brookside Youth Center in Coburg, and that's where I got into restorative justice. And I know many people here are familiar with that, certainly that movement or those efforts. And while I was there involved in the restorative justice work, I became aware of what's called restorative practice, which is a big broadening of that field. Normally in restorative justice, harm has been done. It's about bringing the people together to work it through, to repair the harm, hopefully restore what needs to be restored, or maybe even build a relationship. Restorative practice is a far bigger concept. It's a way of being and a way of thinking. And so I'm going to move to a slide in a moment which will sort of describe what the leadership approach is about. And just before I do that, though, the other part of my, background is once I left Brookside, I worked for 12 years as the Canadian director of the International Institute for Restorative Practice, nonprofit organization based out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And we worked mostly with schools trying to build strong relationships in classrooms or among staff and students, tell people how to repair harm when it occurred. But again, it was in that context of this is a way of being, how to build community that is sustainable, and when things break down, how do you repair that? This little object here, some of you may know, it's called a Hoberman Sphere. Some of you, I think, have one. I think it's a beautiful example of what restorative practice is about. When people are in conflict or they're not connected, they're not relating in a helpful or healthy way, it looks like this. Particularly when harm is done, we tend to really get into that kind of a position. And obviously there's not a lot of connecting or good things going on. Any kind of restorative practice attempts to change the conversation so people feel safe to begin to open up, that others can get in. And so when there's harm that's done, we have structured conversations so people can begin to get at what's happened, the impact, and how that can be repaired. But this also is a beautiful example of what we would like congregations to look like all of the time, or most of the time. Realistically, it's not like this all the time. Because things happen. Maybe it's in a smaller group where some of this occurs, or maybe in the larger group. It depends, obviously. How then can we have those conversations, or a way of approaching things or dealing with one another that enables us to very fluidly, easily begin to move to here? And so there's a lot of proactive things that restorative practice involves. It's not just about going back to try to repair things or fix things, but rather it's how we engage to stay like this. So we go to the next slide now. I'm going to quickly go through this. Those of you who attended the information sessions that Bill and I did online with you in December, you would have seen this. This really describes a relationship style that we really, really want to promote and work at. So there's a lot of words on that slide, but if you kind of look at the top left, that's a style where somebody's very high on being firm about things. This is based on the concept that as human beings, we're most effective if we're firm and fair, sort of that kind of a balance on things. But if someone is really about expectations, being accountable, keeping boundaries, limits, following the rules, we tend to see that person would operate in an authoritarian style where they're doing things to people. At least that's how it's felt. And often, and when something breaks down, we experience something probably adversarial to try to deal with that as well, where we feel attacked or stigmatized. If you go to the bottom, that style, there's not much happening at all that's either firm or fair, and so it's neglectful. The bottom right is really more like a permissive style where the person who's the leader really is all about just being nice or not having high expectations, just really being a caring, loving, supportive person, which is great at times, but it doesn't provide that balance. What we're really aiming for in all of our interactions, and not just with leaders, but how we deal with one another, is where we can really work with each other, where we have high expectations of one another and high support. Often the words that I would use on the axes, I would replace firm with challenge and fair with support. So if we're operating in that restorative quadrant, we provide high challenge and high support. So we challenge people to be their best, do their best, but we also provide a lot of support. So we call this a leadership style because we're clearly looking for leaders that will always try to be like that. And clearly we can't always be up there, but it becomes aspiration, or at least try to get there. But also how we interact with one another is that we're always trying to be clear about who we are, what we want, what we need, but with lots of support. So that's one of the really core principles of being restorative.
Okay, thank you. And our next slide is a series of questions. Yes, and so we refer to these as the restorative questions. You don't have to memorize these, but you will hear them. You will have heard them at almost every meeting you've been at in some form or another. And they're really basically three questions. And it sounds a bit simplistic, but as we've talked as a group, yes, thank you. We've realized we need to be really, this work is simple, but it's complex. I mean, it's deep. And so the questions are pretty simple. What happened? how were you affected, and what do you need to move forward? And at every single one of the sessions we've had, you've basically had those questions posed to you in some form or another. They might vary a little bit, but they're largely about what happened, how were you affected, and how are you going to move forward? The questions are designed with a lot behind them. They've been about 30 years in the building, and they move forward from what are you thinking about to how are you feeling. They also move from the past to the present to the future. So the questions are going to, the work we do is always going to be dealing with where are you, what's happened, and not getting out of that too quickly. Some people will say, let's get on with it, let's get over it, it's time to move on. Other people may be sitting there going, I still need to process some of my stuff and my pain. And so that working through that together as a community, making sure everybody's heard, working with people, which Bruce was just talking about, being together and moving forward. I love restorative practice because it deals with both the pain and the past, but it also deals with the moving forward. And at every single exchange that we've had with you, and we'll go through some of the ones we've had, there has been that, and how will we move forward together? What do we need to move forward together? We don't jump to just that. We're not just blue skying and brainstorming and not dealing with the stuff that's happened, but we're not dealing with just the stuff that's happened. Next slide, please.
So when we think of the restorative questions, or I would also like to use the word relational questions, because it's all about moving people from here to here. So sometimes we would use questions that are really about having people open up and build a relationship, and the more restorative questions are when harm has been done or there's conflict or something like that. So on this continuum that you have in front of you, these are just examples of the way you can engage people restoratively. From very informal ways where we want to make sure we're trying to really get people to open up with one another through the use of effective questions, or questions that allow people to maybe share some thoughts and feelings and open, or using that kind of language. It can be used as a one-on-one conversation, all the way up to a more formal meeting or conference where clearly harm has been done. And just to make a quick reference to the justice system that uses restorative justice, that's pretty much always what that would look like, some kind of a formal meeting facilitated by a trained person. As you probably know, but certainly you will come to know, we use a lot of circles. Some of this draws on some of the wisdom of indigenous approaches, with sort of the understanding that if you sit in a circle, it really shifts the dynamic among people. But most of the way we would use circles is to build relationship, to feel connected. If you go to the next slide. These are just some examples of how then hopefully this way of engaging permeates everything, permeates all our interactions. It's our way of being together, a way of being. And so this is applying some of those thoughts onto maybe some specifics around congregational life, like how do we ensure that people in meetings all have a voice, or planning, or making decisions, etc. And how do we ensure that day-to-day conversations incorporate these basic restorative principles that we think actually move towards building and strengthening relationships? In other words, not to put people into this kind of position with one another, but continually, as much as possible, we're like this. Okay, next slide.
One of the other core principles of restorative practice is something called fair process. And at first glance, that just sounds like another fancy term from our theory, but what it really is talking about, and Bruce mentioned this when he was talking about the leadership quadrants, things need to be done fairly, and we need to be fair with one another. And people will come to agreement and collaborate and work well together when fair process has been in place. Next slide, please. There are 3 parts to fair process. The first is engagement. Everybody needs to be heard. And so if you don't have fair process, people won't be heard. So we don't have enough time to hear from you. We don't want to hear from you. You're not saying the things we want to hear. All sorts of things can shut people down. And as Bruce says, close them down. And just because everybody gets heard doesn't mean everybody's voice is going to be a vote necessarily, or we can do everything that everybody wants. So if we're following fair process and we stand up and someone says, I want this painted green and I want this sanctuary painted yellow and I want the sanctuary painted purple, we aren't going to paint the sanctuary the same for everybody, but everybody will have been heard. The second step in a fair process is that people have explained to them how the decision was made. So a leadership team will listen to everybody, and then it will make a decision. One of the things I like hearing David talk about, there's a pretty clear direction here about how decisions are going to be made. And when decisions are going to be made, they'll be explained. This is how the decision got made. We didn't paint it purple and we didn't paint it yellow, but we decided to paint it blue, and here's why. And then the third part, I'm kind of a simple example, I know, but you can see how, and even in a marriage, again, if people come forward and can both be heard, and then there's an explanation for why I made this decision or why my wife made this decision, and then there's expectation clarity. How are we going to move forward together based on the decision we made? So it's not just we're going to change our governance structure. And now this is how we're going to move forward if we changed our governance structure. And I'm not suggesting in any way that that's what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to have an example that's more than just painting the sanctuary. So if people are heard and they have an explanation for how the decision was reached and an explanation for how they're going to move forward, there's proven research out of Harvard that says groups move forward and can get on board with a decision, even if it isn't the decision they would have liked. But they know where they're going, and they know how to go forward together. Those are the things that are fair process. And when we work with churches, and we work with lots of them, often it's that fair process hasn't been followed. People didn't feel heard. They felt shut down. They felt like they were put into a cube or a sphere, and they didn't know what was happening. And they were expected to just tag along. Next slide, please.
So just a quick review of what we've done so far. Since December, we had the information sessions in January. The reference team then was created after that. It took a while to get the team together. There was lots of discernment on people's part, whether they wish to be part of that. And then we designed the engagement processes. So we had some facilitated conversations, listening circles, for example. And then we had some further conversations around some of the key topics that came out of the listening circles. And the idea is to get to a vision and plan. So this, in a sense, still kind of represents the overall direction we're headed. And if we go to the next slide, please. A few more of the specifics. I won't go through it all again, other than to mention that these were the four key areas that the facilitated conversations in June revolved around. It was all done online. And as Bill noted, we used the restorative questions as a basis, a version of them, for people to share. And for those of you who are part of that, it wasn't like we had a big discussion about what to do, but rather it was a structured opportunity for people to be able to listen to one another, to hear where others were coming from. And that was really critical. And I guess what we learned about moving forward, we're now going to move towards, because there were some really common themes that we heard. And as part of the way we want to do that is we're now going to go to the reference team and have them share some of their experience.
So as you know, we have 6 people on the reference team. To some degree, Bruce and I are also members of the reference team. But we thought we'd ask a couple of questions of the reference team so that they could give you a sense of where we've been and where we're going. So as we always do in our circles, we ask the same question of every person. So who would like to go first? Mary, and who would you like to hand off to, Mary?
David.
Okay. So Mary, what has been your experience been about on the reference team, and why is restorative practice important for Chalmers?
I've enjoyed being on the reference team very much. I've learned a lot. And as most everyone in this room knows, I'm very reluctant to speak in public. So without this prepared text, I would probably be lost. In accepting the invitation, David's invitation, to be part of this group, I knew that I had to have I had to be able to speak up. I had to learn how to speak up. I was very happy to know initially, and this has been confirmed regularly, that we would be advisors to Bruce and Bill. We are not in the position of making decisions for the congregation. We are advisors to Bill and Bruce, and to try and get some sense of what the congregation is thinking during the circles that we had, and to develop ideas for going forward from those circles. On Zoom or in the circles last spring, I could and can see very clearly. I feel that we have a very free exchange of ideas and opinions, and are on an equal footing with each other, which was really important to me. As we continued to have our meetings each week for 2 hours, I soon realized that I could trust everybody on the team to listen to me, even when I knew that my views might differ from theirs, and they sometimes did. At no time did anybody criticize me or shoot me down. Everybody listened with empathy and respect, even when I became emotional, which also happened. The Zoom rectangle and the circle seem to inspire a kind of trust that I don't feel in one of those executive at the front, everyone else facing them kinds of meetings that we have so often here in this church and elsewhere. I'm sure that everyone who participated in a circle would understand that and would see that. The result of the listening, the not interrupting, the chance that everyone had and took to offer comments on what we were discussing, resulted in good decisions at the end. The restorative practice is fair and collaborative, and I really like it. It feels non-democratic and non-threatening. And I was really happy to reflect on each meeting on the results of the circles that we had to try and understand where the congregation is on many different topics and issues that we've had in the past. And I hope very much that this collaborative and restorative practice will help us come to more decisions, better decisions in the future. And it's really nice to see everybody here in the flesh.
And David, who are you going to pass off to?
Heather.
Okay. David, what has been your experience been about on the reference team, and why is restorative practice important in your mind for Chalmers?
I was charged with bringing together the reference team. I was appointed by the CCE as a commission of one with the responsibility of populating that body. I was really glad to do that because I wanted to know what this FaithCare group was all about. I didn't know before meeting them what their raison d'etre was, what could they bring. I can say without an iota of exaggeration that my effectiveness in the communities of faith that I have served in the past would have been improved exponentially if I had the tools that I have learned about through FaithCare folk. There is an honest invitation to name one's truth and to allow others to name their truths, even when they're different one from another. Such that I think, there's two things I think. One, I think we can never devalue or undervalue the place of relationship within the life and work of the body of Christ. Relationships are fundamental to how we coexist and how we find commonality. I would also suggest that the church has done a really, really poor job over its life of encouraging honest, authentic, respectful conversations. We have allowed patterns of behavior in our churches to rule the day. And it is my position that after, and I back this up with 32 years of experience, is that we have allowed bullies and blowhards to run the church. Because we have not been prepared to say, thank you for your contribution, you are not being respectful to me. Thank you for your idea, but it doesn't have enough traction. Instead, what we do, because we're oftentimes silenced by systems and by prevailing personalities, is we step back and we say, well, just let them do it. Now, one of two things happens there. We either stop caring about an outcome, or we believe ourselves not to have a voice. Well, in the church, you ought to have a voice. And so part of the thing that I want to be about in the work that I do going forward, and this is why I think it's important to Chalmers, is if I hear the narrative and I accept the narrative, it suggests to me that you have not always had the best opportunities to have the sorts of conversations that will lead to new and different outcomes. Now, if somebody says to me, prove that, I can't. But I can tell you the stories I've heard and the insights that have been shared with me lead me to believe that there's a better way to be in relationship with each other so that you can truly be a body, diverse as it is wont to be, but held together by a common commitment that what you're about as a faith community is good stuff. I will never enter another piece of work with a congregation that does not include some aspects, some flavoring of restorative conversations and restorative practice. As a matter of fact, I've made a commitment to myself that I'm going to learn more about this in a very structured sort of way because I really enjoy working with Bruce and Bill, and if I learn enough, maybe I can join on.
Bullies and blowhards. Heather, what has been your experience on the reference team, and why do you think restorative practice is important for Chalmers?
Well, I did have some anxiety initially when I was approached to be on the reference team because I am an introvert by nature and I prefer to be in the background. When I heard who the team would be, I did feel somewhat relieved, as I had at least a superficial connection with everyone, whether it be through our children, or being part of the flute choir, or participating in the benevolent program. Over the weeks and months, we have met regularly, and I can say that our ties have grown and strengthened. Our ability to trust not only the process, but each other has deepened. We are able to listen to each other, and each of our voices is sought out. We can disagree respectfully without raising our voice. We have learned that Bill and Bruce are experienced in restorative practice and have helped and are helping many churches who face similar challenges to ours. David King brings wisdom to the table and keeps us grounded. I value each member of this team. Everyone is hopeful for a path forward. I have found restorative care to be a way to be together, to work through a process or a problem. It allows every voice to be heard. Everyone takes a turn. You can pass, but we rarely do, as we know our view will be listened to without interruption. We can express our opinion, no matter if it is divergent from others. We can wonder if, aloud. One of the things I find very useful is a check-in question and a check-out question. This is how every gathering begins and ends. At the start, you respond to a question, taking into account how you are in this moment. Of course, other things affect our lives as we do this important work, and it is helpful to know how one is coming into the meeting. Are you just getting in from a hectic work day? Did you just get back from a day away? Are you feeling unsettled from the last meeting? All these things have an impact. The checkout question at the end takes the pulse of everyone who was present. How do you feel about what was accomplished? We strive to have everyone feeling satisfied with what has been discussed and planned as we look to next steps.
So we go to the next slide, please. So the other half of the reference team is going to share their reflections on this. So we'll start with a volunteer who'd like to start. And then if you could name the person to come after.
Well,
Okay, Bill will start. And
sometimes I do this, and in our reference team, we often say, okay, who's going to start first? And it'll be a different person every time. So,
yeah, thank you.
so that's
So the question is, how would you explain the role of the reference team? How do you see things moving forward, and how is the restorative practice going to be incorporated into the doing here at Chalmers?
Maybe a way to do this would be by example, because I think from what Mary and Heather and David have said already, you've gotten some sense of what the reference team has been doing. We started out rather formally, hearing some in expanded form the overview of restorative practice that Bruce and Bill shared with us. And it was, in a way, like going to school, but week by week, 2 hours by 2 hours, with reflection time in between, our conversations deepened, and we began to share more of our own lives and experience and journey within the Chalmers as a community of faith. And one time, we did something quite different that I think caught us all by surprise. We were asked, each person was singled out, and for all the others to say, what is it that you really appreciate and value about this person? And here we were like, whoa, they're talking about me. I mean, I thought we were just all working together and I'm just one of the group, and now I'm singled out. And I thought, wow, what if as a congregation we did that for everyone in this whole congregation? What an amazing outpouring of who we are and what we value. So I guess I see our role as maybe helping to nurture that kind of thing along. Certainly all of us have ideas about what we might like to see in terms of our worship, in terms of our support for one another, our nurturing of one another, of our outreach to the community. But it's certainly not, very much not, our role as a reference team to develop a proposal for the congregation to approve about each of those aspects of our life. As individuals, I'm sure we'll all contribute to that. But really, I think our role is, as David said, to learn, to take the tools that we've been learning through our own practice in our own meetings and see whether, just as I do with our grandson, when we take the drill together, okay, pull the trigger. He's not 4 yet, but we do it safely and we learn about safety. And so maybe we can learn about how to be in conversation more just by us sharing our experience as we meet to discuss aspects of our life. That I see as our most important role. And it's been an evolutionary path, and it took time. And it's not, I guess I felt comfortable. I'm pretty good at bad ideas. Well, they're not really bad, but they're pretty raw, I guess. But what would happen with an idea when I'd suggest something is that either in conversation we'd improve it and together we'd make it into a good idea, or we'd think it through and we'd say, no, that's not something we should do, or this isn't the right time for that. And okay, that's good. I'm happy to have my idea go either way, but it doesn't just get squashed and thrown in the wastebasket. So that building of ideas, of direction, of wisdom that isn't there in any one of us individually, but is potentially there if we work together in faithful, shared, restorative conversation. Over to you, Anya.
Thank you. Yeah, when I joined the reference team, I thought I'm more of a, one of these people who help Bruce and Bill understand our congregation. I had no idea what I was signing up for. But during these weeks, I learned something really important that I think is also important for Chalmers to go forward, and that is you can have have a meeting that has a certain structure. For example, everybody gets a turn to speak, and the beginning and the end, and you observe certain principles like the fair process, and at the end you get all these different viewpoints together, and a new picture is formed. And we have seen that a few times when we wanted to, had an idea what are we going to do, which meeting, and so on, and there were different opinions. And it occurred to me that in what we have often done at Chalmers, and which is actually very normal in most settings, is that everybody sticks to their opinion, and then it becomes this defensive, like in tennis, right? Bang, bong, bang, and someone wins and someone loses usually. And I was wondering, why did we have all these mediation meetings and we're still at the same spot that we were at the beginning? And I think it's because we haven't really learned how to engage in a different style of conversation, and how to do it is not easy. And but during these weeks, we as a group, we learned that, and we were surprised that you can voice your opinion and give your perspective, and other people give theirs, and at the end something new comes out that nobody kind of anticipated, because it's now something that sometimes someone's viewpoint is not their ideas will not be realized, but still it's a different outcome than this kind of black and white back and forth. And I hope that I feel we are a bit of the incubator group here, and I hope we can bring that to the next meetings we have. You will see that later. We have areas designed from what we heard from the congregation, places that work needs to be done, and we hope that we from the reference team can join these groups and not be the leaders at all, but just be someone who has experience with this process and maybe can help bring that to the group and make sure that the fair process gets on its way. So that would be, I think, our ideal. Yeah, over to you, Nick.
All right. These are big questions. And every week, they keep asking us big questions. What's important in life? What's the meaning of life? Not quite that bad. But it's one thing I find about the practice, how we do it in the reference team, is we each have a say, and we each listen to each other. And I think the biggest thing that we can get out of this collectively is a skill set. And it comes down quite often to asking the right questions and really, really listening to the answers. I've heard all sorts of words: fair process, it's restorative, it's relationships, it's a way of being. We're talking about moving forward. The instinct to go and just do things. If you don't trust each other, if you don't have the relationships built up, if you're not really listening to each other, if you don't know what everyone needs, you can't make decisions that will hold up, because people will disagree with them if they haven't been heard. So, to me, that's the sort of the revelation. The reference team, we've been practicing this for quite some time. doesn't mean we're good at it or anything like that. It's you listen, you hear the questions. The questions are designed to bring things together. So I see our role as kind of cheerleaders, because we're all stronger together, and it's not going to work with just us here. You know, we happen to be the ones on the reference team. We got to get everybody practicing this, trusting each other, getting the relationships, being together again. It's been very difficult in COVID times, but that's what we need to move forward, because important questions of how do you want worship to look? Music that we do in the future, what are the important things to do for the community, for ourselves? We have to ask individuals their opinions on it and hear all of those things before you can make any decisions on any of those big questions. So that's kind of where I'm at.
So thank you to the reference team members. A couple of things struck me as I listened. And I think it was a common thing I heard, or a theme, but Bill, your words it hit me. That if we think to what, some words of Jesus where he talked about where we need to be leaven or yeast to actually have things work. It's kind of how I see the reference team. But also then that it spreads, and everybody's team is saying, that this becomes the way we do things. So that was pretty powerful. And what we're going to be going into now is how the reference team, and this is some of the stuff you had to kind of work through and the way that was described, some of the key themes that stood out from the meetings we had, which then leads us to the part where we see the way forward in terms of next conversations. Over to you, Bill.
Can we have the next slide, please? Oh, thank you. I'm not expecting you to read all this. There's a lot on here, but as we met with you over the last few months, not just in our weekly meetings with the reference team, but when we met with all of you, we were always asking, and what do you think we need to move forward? How will we move forward together? And so we started collecting those over the months, and this to some degree is kind of the list of things that we heard. So we talked about the past, but we also talked about how do we move forward. So I'm not suggesting that we're not interested in things that still need to be repaired or harm that may still be raw. It's not that we're moving on completely, but we're also in the process of beginning to move on. And so some of the themes here resonate with the things that were said by the reference team. And I was struck, we've been doing this work for many years now, but I was struck listening to your reference team talk, and I realized it really does have to start at relationship. We say that all the time, but as I heard people, the reference team talking, I realized you can't jump to do until you trust one another and love one another and care for one another and know each other and are known. And so relationship really does matter. And so one of the things we heard over and over again, and so I'm just summarizing this slide for you, is that community matters. We have to be a community of faith together. That's hard to do in COVID, but it was hard to do before COVID. And so, how we do it in COVID might change a little bit, but we still have to be in relationship with one another. And that takes time and it takes trust. There was also a huge need for spiritual leadership, but a chance to be spiritual together. And so you'll see part of why we have a worship theme is because people are saying it has to start there. So relationship and spiritual relationship together. There's a strong need for leadership and governance, but this is not just a governance project. I go into lots of churches and non-churches where they'll say, well, we just need to restructure. Well, no, sometimes you may need to restructure and revisit your governance. And Mary and I often joke that, governance is a big issue, and we need to work on that. But it's a piece of the puzzle. It isn't the puzzle. And then being able to communicate better and to be able to have fair process. Being fair with one another, being with one another. Those were the things that we kept hearing you say. You might not have used that exact language, but that's what this list talks about. So let's go to our next slide.
So what the reference team discerned by looking at all of the key ideas that were shared is there's 3 key areas in your life as a congregation where there needs to be some serious reflection given in the way we've been describing. So where everyone gets to have a voice, it's a chance to hear what it is that your thoughts are on what's needed or what's up for offer in terms of how we can do what needs to be done. And those areas would be worship. And so what does it really mean to be a spiritual community connected to the divine? And how do we celebrate that? How do we experience that together? So clearly there's some very historic or traditional ways that's happened, but we want to have some open conversations or sharing about that. The second one we categorized a team as in-reach. So how do we reach out to each other within this community of faith? How are we in community together? What are the values that we want to really espouse and experience? How are we going to focus on building and strengthening relationships? And where there still needs to be repair of harm, how can we have that happen? So many things can happen in the in-reach, obviously, as well as having fun together. Fellowship time is really critical in congregational life. One of the key things is we didn't really share today about restorative practice and how you build relationships is clearly you need a way to be able to have voice, to repair harm, talk about the impact and move forward. But it's just as critical in a restorative community about how we relate in really positive ways, how we experience good things together. And that's really much of what church life is for people, and that's good. So how we can kind of try to be there a lot. So one of the ways that happens that I've observed often is eating together or sharing in some kind of a community event together. So this is all part of what's that in-reach that we can do. And then the outreach is how we can reach then out to the broader community. I mean, these terms are probably pretty common terms, but we sort of felt that there was a lot of this there, or these 3 things were in what we heard. Now, on the right side then is how through everything we can keep these overarching principles at the core, such as a focus on relationships, being restorative in thinking and doing, incorporating fair process, using relational questions to help people open up and hear a little bit about that experience and what that's like when we do that from your reference team members. And of course, use of those more of those restorative questions as needed, but we don't anticipate that to be the bulk of it. And then really focusing on this idea of with leadership and with working with each other with high challenge and high support. And then other things which would be part of that mindset of being restorative, such as respect, relationship-centered, invitational, etc. So how can we test everything we do to those principles?
Okay, the next slide, please. I won't spend too much time on each of these. We just wanted to take the 3 big focus areas and break them down a little bit for you. But really this is about making sure that worship stays central to who we are. And that worship is also restorative, that it's about building relationships. So we don't just come to worship and sing some songs, we come to be community together. This can be lay and clergy-led, and it's to some degree a lot, as Bruce said, about discussing how we connect to the divine. How do we connect to one another? How do we connect to the divine? And so this idea is going to be more fully in all 3 of these areas. We're planning a session where you can come and talk about this in a restorative, structured fashion, of course, at McCallum Hall. So if this speaks to you and you want to be a part of what might this look like, then you probably want to come to McCallum Hall on Monday, October the 4th from 7 to 8:30. We're going to have a session around each of these where we'll use the restorative questions and we'll talk about how can we be together and how can we move forward together. And so the worship meeting we're using 2 Mondays and a Sunday. So today's a Sunday, and one of our other sessions will be a Sunday and 2 Mondays. So hopefully everybody can have a chance. So everybody that's here today doesn't have to come to that meeting, but all of you are welcome to come to that meeting. And we'll start talking about what is worship, what can worship look like, what should remain, what should go. Some people may say, well, I really want the organ every Sunday, and someone else might say, I never want the organ, ever. But that's okay at that meeting, because we can start talking and hearing from each other. The next slide, please. The second focus area is InReach. We had a bunch of different community engagement, pastoral care, a lot of other terms for this one. But when we used outreach, we also thought of InReach, because a lot of churches, I was just reading in some of the literature, a lot of churches think you've got to be missional, you've got to be out on the street, you've got to be outside yourselves. It's not about inside the walls, it's all about getting outside. But it's both. It's what's going on inside the walls and what's going on. If we get too insular and we're not concerned about the people around us in the greater Kingston area, not all of them, but the ones that we're called to serve, then we can get too outward focused, but we can get too inward focused, and it has to be both. So we have both here. So this is about reaching in and restoring relationships. I like the circle, the idea that as it opens, others can come in. We don't get so closed and broken that others aren't invited in. But it is about inviting people into the community and caring for one another. And then finally, outreach. Again, a relatively common term, can be overused perhaps in churchland, but what we're talking about here is what needs to be continued of the things that we did before COVID, that have survived through COVID maybe. We may want to revisit some of the ministries you've had. You may want to think about some new ministries or different ways of doing things. But what could we test? What could we try? What pilot projects might we do? And how could we innovate? And I think this is, if you're a Martha, a person who really wants to get doing something and is sick of sitting around and talking about stuff, you're going to love this one, I betcha. I think Marthas should come to all of the meetings, but this might be the one where the real doers want to get doing. So I'm not trying to be nasty to Marthas in any way. Okay, and so those are the three areas, and that session is going to be October 25th.
So this slide is really a bit of a, just a little more information on how the restorative way of thinking and being needs to be incorporated in everything. So we want to make sure these elements are always included, ensure fair process is consistently applied, and not just in decision-making, but anywhere, anytime people come together. So some of that is having voice and understanding what's happening, etc. Using relational questions. So one of the things that Heather mentioned about the reference team is we always do a check-in. Sometimes those are sort of, well, how are you doing? You know, what's happening in your life, that kind of thing, just to kind of connect. But it also could be, and often is, so what have you been thinking about that we, relating to last meeting that you wanted to share as we start this meeting? Or maybe there's a big topic we're now going to get onto is, so what are you looking forward to today and trying to address that? So questions that get people thinking and then engaged with others listening, we think is critical. So I would call those more relational questions, and the restorative is, as I've said. And keeping people always trying to move towards where we work with each other, and where leadership is working with each other and with others, where we challenge and support people in ways they need. And remember that this applies not just to the community, but to ourselves as individuals. So again, this is really, we want this to kind of be in the back of people's minds. So we go to the last slide, please. So really then, just to kind of put it in a diagrammatic form, these three areas we see as the place to begin the conversation. So you have that opportunity over the next 2 or 3 weeks, 3 weeks or so, to come together and make sure everybody has a voice to share their views on things. We'll create some questions to help you do that, starting with worship and then going to inreach and then outreach. And at the core of that, we will talk about, and this is where I think the reference team will act as yeast or leaven to kind of insert sort of their experience into the conversation and where we want to go. And we're also hoping that in these meetings, leaders will begin to emerge, people that become kind of interested or passionate even about some of these areas. So we're not going in with saying who are the leaders, but rather we want people to really share first with one another how they would see these things, and then we're kind of take it step by step. So that's just part of it, but clearly it's an opportunity to begin to explore each of these areas. So, okay. So I guess that brings us
To our last slide,
to the last slide.
which is this is just a summary of the meetings that we'll be having: a worship meeting, an in-reach meeting, and an outreach meeting. And as Bruce has just said, it's not to sort of, okay, let's elect a leader. It's let's talk about how we're going to be together in these areas of worship, in-reach, and outreach. Some of you may want to come to all three of those meetings. Some of you may come to none of them. Some of you may come to one or two. And the people who are listening online or watching this on YouTube later, et cetera, feel free to attend any of those meetings that make sense to you. I think we have a, yeah.
And also, we simply see this as the start of these conversations. This will not be kind of a one-off, but rather it will be the start of these conversations. Yeah.
Are there any questions for any of the reference team, or for David, or for Bruce or myself as we come to a close? You've been a very patient, I'll say audience, congregation, restorative circle. Yes? We need to record for the people that are listening from other places. Oh, here comes a microphone. Ivan? Oh, okay.
Ivan's got a mic if you want to.
I'm a longtime member of the choir, and I have met my hubby over there in 1966, sitting up there. So I think I saw something about closure of the choir. And at some point, there's Mary over there. At some point, I'd like to hear what that means. Hopefully not what bad thing I'm thinking, but...
I don't know anything about that.
Okay, sure.
It had to do with closure with what happened with David Melhorn Bow, bringing some kind of official closure to that, as it felt. We heard from different people that it felt very messy, that people were hurt. So something that could address that and bring closure to that piece, not closure to the choir. Is that?
I think that's what it said on there.
It had the initials DMB, which stood for David Melhorn Bow. So I think maybe it wasn't fully understood with those initials.
Yeah, and that's a good example that if that is felt to be a need, then we would have some kind of process to address that need. But we want to focus our energies, I think, on what do we do now from the way forward. So that's why we've got these three key areas. But that might come out of that worship sharing as well, that maybe there's something needs to be done. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Janice Moncrief, and I just wondered if there's a way to include people in the circles that maybe have been absent from the circles, that I feel maybe should be in the circles, but are not in the circles. And so we're sort of 100% committed to restorative practice, not, 80% of us are and 20% are not or absent, if you get my drift.
Always tried to do, Janice, is be very invitational. And in fact, that's one of our grounding principles. We never drag people to a meeting. We only invite people to a circle or a conversation. But I would think it would be wise for all of you to invite your friends to these circles if you think they should be there.
Right. And what about your enemies, too?
Bring your enemies, too, sure.
Okay.
Keep them close, as I say.
Well, we think that's really critical, because I think what people begin to be fairly surprised by is you can actually sit in a circle and hear very different views than yours, and some of you might stir up a lot of feeling, but we listen differently when we have a bit of a structured process that gives everybody a voice, etc. So we were strongly encouraged for people who have diverse views to come. Yeah.
Right, and if people are not coming, I guess that's their choice. I'm just worried that, we have all this beautiful restorative work, and then we go back sort of to the way we were with voices that weren't in the circle, that didn't learn to be restorative, that, you know what I mean?
I might add, I was asked what sort of criteria was I looking for. One of the things that I will really be keen to see is people participate. I want to find the right language to say this. You're all afforded a chance to be involved. And it's a little bit like being an elector. You have a right, and one asks, what's the responsibility? That's the flip side of that. So if, in fact, it's important for you to have a fresh, different, informed vision for Chalmers, it's really incumbent on you to make yourself available and to add your voice to that. Because, with respect, the days of paying heed to those who intentionally absent themselves so that they can circle around and reintroduce their dislike, disdain, whatever that is, have to be done. This is fair chance, this is fair process, this is fair opportunity. I really want to encourage folks to get involved and see it as worthwhile. Because if that's not the case, if folks don't come, that will be saying something too. I don't know what that will say, but it will certainly say something different than, here I am, I'm ready to add my voice.
So just to add to what David just said, which I don't want to repeat the whole thing, but the reference team as a whole really wants full participation of anybody who would like to come into the circles, whether you agree with what the current issue is or want to participate in it. If you don't agree, it's very important that we hear from everybody. And if we don't practice this kind of conversation, this restorative conversation, we will not be able to move ahead. It's a leap of faith for this church.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janice.
There's Marilyn behind you. Marilyn.
Hello, I'm Marilyn Braden. Yes, mask off. I don't know that it's an appropriate time to ask the question I'm asking, but we're all here. I'm wondering if there are any circumstances under which we can hire a minister to do A, pastoral care, or B, help us with worship, and as a temporary interim basis. For instance, if we were to hire someone from the supply list for a period of 3 months, for instance, is that permissible? Could we hire pastoral care for 3 months or 6 months? But that would, 3 months is too short for pastoral care. We need some continuity, I think. I'm looking for an answer to that. Thank you.
The answer is we have established processes around retaining ministry personnel to serve in a church. One of them is called an appointment. So you either call someone or you have them appointed. Appointments are oftentimes done for shorter periods of time, so it is possible. And I appreciate the desire to want to get folks in those roles. Absolutely, I do. I would note, though, that there will be some expectation on the part of the larger church. One, that there be some supporting documentation around what you need, who you're looking for, that sort of thing, so that it can go up on the hub. Now, it's a platform that the church has developed to ensure that you have as wide an array of candidates. You have exposure to a wide array of candidates as you possibly can. To understand that within our ethos, it is not possible to hire in a minister from another denomination. Full stop. It is possible to hire a pastoral care worker who has another tradition, or from another tradition, because they're not ultimately responsible for the big picture. They're more concerned about relationship building and responding to crisis. So the short answer is yes, it is possible. The longer answer is we'd have to do some work to make that happen, but it's not impossible. I would caution, though, that we not get our hopes up too quickly. We waited a year and a half to attempt to find a pastoral care provider. That was the work that the region was doing. And we also tried to hire an administrator. Neither of those two positions had any interest at the time. Not to say it wouldn't come down the road, but at the time. So yeah, absolutely, and that is something that I would help shepherd through process, because that's what I know.
Thank you very much.
If one is interested in attending one of these but is not available, are there going to be alternate times? And wondering how that's going to be addressed, or is it just forget it if you can't attend because of another commitment?
Well, certainly the reference team would have some conversation around that, but my hope would be that we would try to accommodate if there's enough people to do, say, a second session. But we'd have to talk that through, right?
And I would add that these are just the starts of these conversations, so I would think that they are probably going to take more than 1 or 2 sessions. So I think if you're, obviously if there were 16 people that wanted to come to worship and 15 of them can't come, then, maybe we can work something out. But I think these conversations will become ongoing and you can continue to join them. But let's do what we can to make sure as many people can come as possible. Bill has a question from the internet.
Well, actually, this is somewhat related to closure for today, so I'm just checking, are there any other people who wish to speak or ask? Or
Could you speak directly into the microphone?
is that better? Okay. So first of all, a note of appreciation. This comes from Michael Cook. Please convey my deep gratitude and respect for the work of the reference team. Chalmers is very lucky to have the grace and love, come on, telephone here, grace and love you are contributing. I do hope David and FaithCare will provide more regular updates about this work and the evolution of the congregation's life. I think we will benefit greatly from hearing more and hearing more often. So I guess that's a question for all of us on the reference team about communicating with the congregation. And I would invite everyone who's gathered here in your conversations informal after this and beyond. As we go on and as we have these meetings, what kinds of communication, if you're not able to participate in one, what kind of communication about what happened there would be helpful to you so that we all have a feeling of moving together. So please contribute your thoughts, and certainly our reference team will take very much at heart how we continue to report. We have been trying, not always weekly, but every week or two after our meetings to craft, which we did collaboratively through many emails, a message to you about our work, but there may be other ways that we should be communicating as well, through little phone trees or through gatherings of small groups or whatever. So please, let's keep talking about our work and how we're doing, so we all feel, as Janice said, that we all feel included in this, even if we're not able to participate in specific aspects. Thank you.
So, Nick, would you sort of share about the sign-ups, et cetera? About the sign-up, et cetera, for the sessions, or how that's going to... Yeah.
The sign-up process will be similar to what we did for the earlier circles, so that we'll get a number from Carol to put it up. I should have had it for this slide. I don't. So Carol would register. We've got capacity limits in McCollum Hall, but circles, take a lot of time. So if we have to, we could always use like an upstairs room as well if we get lots of people interested. But it'll be basically register in advance. We'll put out probably, can't wait for the bulletin, we probably should put this information out in the next couple of days. So, because especially since the first one is next Monday. I don't know, was there anything else that we needed specific about it? It was basically a call into Carol. I suppose we could email too if we didn't pay up.
Yeah, and also if you can't sign up and you decide to go at the last minute, you're still welcome to come. It won't
Take
be
your
too
chances if you try to show up at the last minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the top of that, it says to submit questions to questions and answers. Is that something that you are gathering questions about for these meetings?
Sure. Mary was just saying if anybody has questions about today or that you want to submit in advance of those, you can email them to any of us. Some of you have my email or Bruce's, but all our emails, yeah. So feel free to, if you've got questions about what you've heard or where we've been or where we're going or how these sessions are going to unfold or what you think might be helpful, just email us. Sure. Of today's slides? Yeah, Mary wonders if anybody would like a copy of today's slides. You have them, so you can make them available, certainly. Yeah.
And I think in light of the question around the choir, that should be made clear what that was saying. So maybe, Bill, if you could make that change. Or maybe would it be Nick? The question around the choir, it looks like the choir's closing. Just if you could, we want to make sure that that's not the message people get. It was clarified here. It was closure. Okay. Well, we'll work out so that the slides reflect what they need to. Yeah, okay.
And the other thing I would add as well is if you've got questions around the state of affairs currently of Chalmers or questions about where do you tie in if you're a part of a committee or whatever, by all means give a call. It will continue to be as it is now until such a time as collectively there's a desire to see some change. So look for some communication from me around that very issue. Because right now, what we're obviously doing in terms of the restorative practice piece is to begin to prepare for what might be down the road, but we also have currently, we've got some things we need to attend to in terms of business and opportunities. So, as I say, reach out. Oh, and I should say, I intentionally turned around, having been on the 401, and went back home to get some cards. So if you need a handy-dandy way to be in touch with me, there's cards here for that.
Looks like we have one more question.
I've felt strongly about the concept of individual people's perception of the truth and their truth. And the truth for one person is not necessarily the truth for another person. But I have found occasionally that perceptions of the truth of other people have crept into communications that have come from the reference team. And I think it's absolutely critical that I've heard perceptions of the truth from today during the conversation. And I don't agree with everything that's been said by everybody today. And I understand that I have to listen to everybody, and it has to be fair. But I do, on occasion, have concern that somebody's perception of the truth is somehow almost presented as if it is the truth. And it's really critical that that not happen. And so everybody, me, everybody here, everybody up there, has to be aware when they say things that it's their truth or their perception of the truth. It's not everybody's, and they don't present it as if it's a fact. So that's something that I wrestle with all the time. And we have to be fair, and we have to listen, and we have to accept what other people say and believe and what's their truth. But it can't be accepted as fact and truth for everybody else.
I've been asked to send us on our way in prayer. Won't you join me? Good and gracious God, we have been blessed by an opportunity to be in community, an opportunity to hear and to ask questions, to invest ourselves in learning more. And so we give thanks not just for this opportunity, but for the ones that will be afforded to us going forward. May what we be about, may it be such that more feel included, more feel welcome, and more be given space to add their voice and their wisdom, their experience, and their desire to the conversations that we'll make for the future of this place. Grant us now traveling mercies as we make our way to our homes and places of leisure. For today and our time has been spent well. In the name of the one who is for us, the Christ, Jesus. Amen. Mm-hmm.